So one of the things you're going to have to do a lot of is graphing rational functions. Now, there are 4 steps to graphing a rational function. You're going to find the x-intercept and the y-intercept, and you're going to graph those. Then you're going to find the vertical asymptote and the horizontal asymptote and graph those. Once you have that done, then you're going to set up a table and you're going to find a few more points, and we'll talk about which ones to find, and then you'll just sketch that in. So you're trying to find a sketch of the graph. It doesn't have to be exactly perfect. So here I have a function, and the first thing I want to do is find my x and y-intercepts. Now, the y-intercept is easy. If you remember the y-intercept, x equals 0. So what we'll do is we'll just plug in 0 for x, and this is actually pretty easy just to do in your head, but I'm doing it just to show you here. And so we see that we get 0 over -1, which is 0. So my y-intercept, x is 0 automatically, and then we found that y is 0. So that's going to be my y-intercept. Now for my x-intercept, that one always kind of sends people a little bit for a loop there. So for a y-intercept, or for the x-intercept, y equals 0. Now f of x is y, so this whole thing equals 0 here. So we're looking at that equaling 0. So of course it looks a little bit strange. It looks like I don't know how I'm going to find that to be equal to 0. But ultimately, if we think about it, if I can make the top equal to 0, then that means that the whole thing will equal 0, because 0 over anything is going to be 0. So I need 2x squared to equal 0. And so when I do that, 2x squared equals 0, divide by 2, x squared equals 0, square root, x equals 0. And so if I find that my x-intercept, we found that x equals 0 when y equals 0. It's not always going to be 0. Sometimes it'll be something different. So just be aware that it might change. So don't automatically go with 0. You have to actually check it out. All right, so that's my x and y intercepts. Now for my vertical asymptote. Now remember, the vertical asymptote, you set the bottom equal to 0 and solve. And we actually have done this. We leave x plus 1, x minus 1, set those equal to 0. We get a vertical asymptote for x equals 1 and x equals -1. So we're going to have 2 of them. And for my horizontal asymptote, I'm checking my degrees. Now the top degree is 2, the bottom degree is 2, they're the same. And when they're the same, that means you have to take the numbers in front and divide them. So we get y equals 2 as my horizontal asymptote. Okay, so now we start graphing. Let's see what we have so far. So far I have that my vertical asymptote is at 1 and -1, so I'm going to put those in. And we have a horizontal asymptote at 2. So we'll put that in. Okay, now we have our x and y intercept are actually the same point. It's going to be right there at the origin. So now what I want us to do is to set up a table. We've got to plug in values for x. Now the values we can plug in for x here, we have vertical asymptote at 1 and -1. So at 1, I want to find about 3 points out here. So I need to plug in 2, 3, and 4. And then over here, I need to get about 3 points. So I'm going to plug in -2, -3, -4. The other thing I want to do is I have to find out more about in here. Now that's going to be a little more difficult because this is 0 and this is 1, which means I want to find some points in between. So I'm going to plug in 0.5 and -0.5. Run out of room there. Okay, so then what we do is we have to go up to our function here and we have to plug in these numbers. It's a tedious job. One of the things you can do is use a graphing calculator and plug in your function. You just have to plug it in very carefully. Make sure that you use parentheses. The thing I don't like about having you do this is that a lot of times people are like, oh, I could just graph this then and see what it looks like. And that's true. You can, but it's not, I want you to be able to do this by hand. And so by plugging these numbers in, you can do that by hand. I know you can do that math. So I'm just trusting that you're just using this as the device to help you get some more answers here. So if we plug in 2, I get 2.6 repeating. 3 gives me 2.25. 4 gives me 2.133. -2 gives me 2.6 repeating. I have a feeling we're going to see the same numbers as what we've already gotten. -3 gives me 2.25. So this is going to be a symmetric one. And we get 2.133. So for these so far, I've got 2, 3, and 4. I got 2.66. It's a little over halfway there. and I got 2.25, and I got 2.13. So you can see that it's coming down towards the asymptote. So I'm going to draw it so it's hugging the asymptote there. And then it'll probably come up, well, not even probably, it's going to come up and hug the asymptote there. And the same thing is going to happen on the other side. So it'll come down and hug the asymptote down here, hug the asymptote up there. So now it's a matter of finding about in the middle. And so that's where my 0.5 comes in. Now when I plug in 0.5, I'm just going to graph it. When I plug in 0.5, I get negative 0.66. So it's about right there. And when I plug in negative 0.5, I get negative 0.66 again. So it's about right there. So that means this one's going to kind of have a little bit of a parabola looking thing going on, only it doesn't keep on going out. It just hugs the asymptote there. And so that's our graph. So once again, just to recap, you need to find, when you're graphing a rational function, you need to find the x-intercept by plugging in 0 for y. And remember, if the top equals 0, the whole thing equals 0. You need to find the y-intercept by plugging in 0 for x. You find the vertical asymptotes by taking the bottom equal to 0. You find the horizontal asymptote using the rule about the degrees. Once you do that, you sketch out what you have, and then you go and you set up a table. And the numbers you pick for your table, you need to find stuff. When you look at your vertical asymptotes, you need to find stuff on the right-hand side, stuff on the left-hand side. So you want to fill in at least 3 in each section so that you can get a good idea of what it is. Sometimes you need to do more than 3 because sometimes there's a really big section. You want to know what it looks like. So don't be stingy on your numbers, but you don't also have to get carried away.